I've continued exploring the themes of belonging and home in the context of people of multiple heritage or immigrant backgrounds. And this remains a quest to explore those experiences as ones that sit between the factual and the fictional. The first couple of weeks of the module were focused on presenting a small selection of my MA work at Hull International Photography Festival. I presented a sequence of images built on the idea of a poetic structure, with each image being a word that, when placed with other images, creates a visual sentence. However, in showing that work, I realised that any mixed media elements present needed to be rethought and offered differently, and it made me consider how I might show work in future, and I'll discuss that in a little more detail later on. At the time, I also gave a talk about the work at Shoreham WordFest, and the full video of that discussion is available in my critical research journal. But that talk and the ensuing discussion clarified for me that a literary approach to the sequencing of work translates well, and is something that is starting to embed itself in my process. And during related research, I encountered the notion of biomythography. Now, that's a term created by the radical feminist writer Audre Lorde, and it's defined as the weaving together of myth, history and biography in epic narrative form, a style of composition that represents all the ways in which we perceive the world. It takes the idea of crossing boundaries as the basis of its form. So this definition is very powerful for my project, as it underlines fully what I'm attempting to achieve. Much of this progress is helping me to see the approach, though still nebulous, that I'm taking is gradually solidifying as a body of work, leading me forward. For this module, I've continued to follow instinctual, if unresolved, pathways. The idea of biomythography, alongside my own DNA test results, have pushed me to explore personal and family mythologies, both of myself and others, especially such things as anecdotes, tales and reported histories that take on an almost mythological quality for people and their families. Alongside this, I also chose to explore food as an element of heritage and myth, partly because my father was a chef, but also it became apparent when talking with collaborators that it was often at the core of their identity. And as a result of this work, tutor Claire Bottomley suggested I take a look at the 17th century Dutch form of painting called vanitas. Now, these were still life works that sought to encapsulate a life through symbols of change, transience and death, and often used items that denoted a person's wealth and status. And one particular exponent of this form of painting was the artist Peter Sion, and I took a good look at his work and some of the elements that often appeared in that work. And so I explored this photographically, and I extended the food symbolism to a curated version of my own life. In the first instance, I created some very traditional looking vanitas across one entire day from dawn to dusk. But I didn't feel that these images sat well in context with other work, so utilising the notion of transience present in vanitas, I attempted to approach work more in keeping with other images in my portfolio, in effect trying to tease out things that might contemporise them. And I guess in context with this, it's worth noting again that some of my work is coming about as a result of the death of my younger brother during the previous module, and also the fact that in this module, my father has been diagnosed with potentially terminal throat cancer. Now, I'm not fully clear what this means for my project, but the presence of these events is definitely resonating in some aspects of the work. And although that might still be unresolved, tutorials have reminded me that at this stage the work can still be experimental. It's a chance to ask questions and not necessarily to have answers yet. And indeed, it's clear from what I've discussed so far that this is the case for me at the moment. So this will lead me on now to some of the critical contexts and influences that I've had during this module. I visited the exhibition Feast for the Eyes at the Photographers Gallery in London, which looked at food and photography. This is one of the best exhibitions I've been to in a long time, and I came away with a profound sense that I'd been right to follow my instinct on the food-based work for my work in progress. From this exhibition, I was really struck by the work of Laura Latinsky, whose work I've seen before, but in this context it really struck home. Things are very unsettled in her work. Items are frequently teetering on the brink of falling from surfaces. There's a palpable sense of turmoil and change, and the viewer is party to the aftermath of narratives full of emotion or events that have literally just happened. For me, her work deals with the psychological through a poetic space, and in this it sits on the intersect of that line between fact and fiction that I'm trying to disentangle in my own work. Though I've tended to denigrate still life as a photographic form for its frequent lack of emotive content, I would say that Latinsky's work has altered that. And as a result, I've responded to that and tried to push the human narrative in my own still life explorations. Overall, female voices have been strongest for me this module, and I'll briefly note here that Sasha Rudensky, Eleanor Carucci, and Laura Panak have featured heavily in my research, and you can read more about this in my CRJ post Female Voices. So moving on to some of the approaches I've taken. Early on, I made a deliberate decision to take a break from the mixed media work that I explored in my first two modules. That is not necessarily because I'm intending to ditch them, but it was partly as a response to showing that kind of content at Hull International Photography Festival. But more that I wanted to qualify progress in my photography in light of those past two modules. And I would say that that decision has shown me that my desire to pursue specific psychological and emotional outcomes in the work has become stronger, even if that hasn't translated into the work fully yet. So that's something I need to work on moving forward, I think. But to facilitate some of that, I've been working much more with the camera on a tripod and shooting with a shutter release rather than through the viewfinder, especially for my portrait work. And the results for that have been technically mixed, but the content and connection, I think, contains more honesty, and this is an approach that I certainly will be carrying forward. So in light of all this, I'm now going to consider my work in context with the overarching theme of the module, Sustainable Prospects. And the main question here for me is, where is my MA practice leading me in terms of my prospects as a photographer, especially one who has been working commercially already for nearly 7 years? And this is not an easy question to answer at the moment. The work I'm producing for the MA is closer to a fine art documentary style, and this burgeoning aspect of my practice is definitely not yet ready for a marketplace and does not sit easily within the commercial marketplaces I already work in. Some of the assignment work has helped me to see what I do have in place as a working photographer and what already works for me. I have solid web presences and social media identities that keep distinct elements of my output separate to make it easier for clients and viewers to access and assess my work. My MA Work in Progress website is a space to present work that isn't resolved and to pursue a deliberately experimental agenda, though I do ensure that all my websites link to each other. So if I want to build prospects for this aspect of my practice, I guess I need to define outcomes, perhaps put marketing strategies together around the final major project, and include approaches to relevant people or organisations. And this is one reason why I bought into the 9-week pitch assignment to the extent that I did during this module, to exercise the pitching muscle and remind myself of what is required in such an approach to a client. So to conclude, biomythography and a literary approach have become backbones of my project and will, I believe, continue to be. From the insights gained at Hull International Photography Festival, I'm thinking about how my project might work as an installation to include audio recordings, artifacts and other material. And I'm looking at Brighton Photo Fringe 2020 as a possible outlet for that. Finally, this module has impressed upon me that long-term project work requires stamina, patience and preparedness to keep moving forward.